So welcome to this discussion of your assignments. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the assignment that you handed in last week and that you have received. Normally, you should be able to download it from your Moodle page, and I want to sort of spend some time in this so that way you feel a little more confident because you have another one to do for next week. And I think if you really understand what's going on with the first one, the second one will be a lot easier. So I would say the first thing that is to understand that, you know, you don't have to write very much. I don't want. There are a lot of assignments that were fairly long and they weren't very carefully written, and that's probably the thing that you should really try to avoid doing. The idea is that you're being a little bit deliberate about the way you're writing. You're very careful to do things sort of, I would say, correctly and sort of in a way that shows that you're kind of aware of what you're writing, right? Okay. So here the first thing is to really to do what is asked, to underline. Here you have to underline all the verb phrases, okay? And it's really important, first of all, to identify a verb phrase. For example, if I write a sentence, you know, they, may have been walking in the park. There's our sentence, right? There's only you have to underline may have been walking, right? That is the verb phrase. If you remember the definition, we have, we can have in a verb phrase we can have the main verb, right, which is going to be the last verb in the verb phrase. It's canonical and it's sort of an affirmative, especially if it's affirmative. And notice we can have, up to 3 auxiliaries, and you've seen these auxiliaries before. Modals are always the first auxiliary. We have our modal construction, modal plus verb stem, right? And then we have. And here we have the second construction, which is have plus verb en, right? Have been. And then our third construction is be plus verb ing. So we have been plus walking, right? So we've had, this is how we can kind of imprecate these constructions, and they're always obeyed. And that is all we have in a verb phrase. We have a main verb, and there may or may not be auxiliaries. So we have the simple construction, of course, then there are none if it's a simple affirmative construction. So it's a very simple thing to do, but it goes a long way to helping you out to doing the rest of this thing correctly. For example, if you underline the whole thing, that's not the verb phrase. If you underline a part of it, that's not the verb phrase, right? There's the piece of the verb phrase. If you underline, let's say, walking in the park, that's not a verb phrase either. Okay, so that's really, really, really important to, I would say, understand there. The second thing perhaps to do with this is that there is a certain difficulty that consists in being really sure that you know the constructions. For example, here you're aware of the fact that we have, as I said, we have plus verb en and be plus verb ing, because verb ing can appear by itself, right? I can say walking along the street, he whistled. Okay, so there's a sentence there. Walking along the street, he whistled. So here you might see the walking. You might see this. This is a verb ing construction, and you think that that's a verb phrase. But we have learned all the constructions. That is what we call a verb ing clause. Notice there is no subject. Right? This is something we're gonna study later, but this is not something we have seen. So the idea is only identifies the things that we have seen, right? When you say they might have been walking, oh, I see what this is. This is modal plus and so on. But walking down the street, this is not be plus verb ing, right? Here we have be, we have verb ing, so that is going to be a verbal construction. This is not a construction we have seen. It's just walking. This is what we call a verb ing clause, or a present participle clause, and it's not a verb phrase, right? Verb phrases have subjects and conjugated verbs. So that led to confusion. So that means if you have like an infinitive to, I want to say something. Here, the verb phrase is going to be, want. That's the conjugated verb, right? To say is an infinitive, and that is this is something we're gonna, you're gonna study later more in detail. But the idea is this is not one of the constructions we've seen. We have not studied we have not studied infinitive clauses. We have not studied walking. Verb ing clauses. So because of that, there's nothing to say about them. You're not supposed to underline them. The only things you're supposed to underline are verb phrases. And so try to limit yourself to what you know, right? We've if you have the confidence to sort of, I would say, not sort of try to invent what you don't know, and you only try to identify what you do, and you remember the verb phrases we've studied, it'll really help you identifying them. So that was a problem that was a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be. And by the way, I will sort of neutralize this in the second test. If this is something that you do very well, if you figure this out by the next assignment, that I'll definitely can take that into consideration. So don't be too bent out of shape about that, but just try to keep that in mind, that especially for those of you who may have written sort of very long assignments, and really without being very deliberate about identifying things. A lot of times you just sort of picked up anything that looked like a verb, you sort of underlined it. The idea is to specifically underline exactly what the verb phrase is, because that's very important. Because otherwise, you're going to not really have the kind of control you need, and it's going to make it that much harder to especially to identify the verb form. Now the verb forms we've seen these. I'm not going to go over these again. Just the idea is you just have to be accurate. Don't confuse one for another. And then of course these different ways that we use them. Some of these are pretty good. I would say beware of sort of states. A lot of times you might not have picked up the fact to be is always going to be a state verb. So maybe review what we said about states. But otherwise, I think that's pretty good. Once again, there's always the difficulty between with the present continuous. This is what we call this sort of exceptional behavior that might have been kind of difficult to understand. The idea being there's this opposition between an action happening now and what we call exceptional behavior. Because if I say something like he is smoking a lot this week, right? First of all, he is smoking a lot this week, as opposed to the sentence in general he doesn't smoke, right? So there's this one opposition between the simple present, which is sort of not at all fixed on the timeline, it can often be sort of atemporal, and the present continuous, right, which is much more anchored around the present time. And yet we're not talking what is happening right now at this very minute before my very eyes. That's what we say. That's when we have an action happening now. We're saying he is smoking a lot this week. So there's sort of a dilation around that sort of present moment. I'm sort of saying this is the present. We're sort of spreading out around here, right? So that dilation around. So we're going to say exceptional behavior when we're talking about something that is happening sort of what we might say around now, right? This week, right? But what we mean is we're not talking about something that is happening at this very moment under our, before our eyes. That would be an action happening now, right? So that's sort of what is meant mostly by exceptional behavior. You're fairly good with background events and interrupted actions. A lot of you figured that out, and that's definitely good, and it's not so obvious. And it's important not to really be able to distinguish that from a habit, especially because both correspond with l'imparfait en français. So if you can really always be aware of sort of what a background, an ongoing, one way to think of this action. I was walking down the street when something happened, right? And the habit, which would be both would be imparfait en français. Il passait beaucoup de temps dans ce quartier. That wouldn't be he was spending. It would be he spent, right? And so the idea, and just to remember also these things. Here we're talking about in number 3 here we're talking about the types of ways that the simple present is using. So never say that a habit is going to be the present continuous, because that is actually the whole point, is that if we're talking about a sort of a simple habit, we're going to be talking about the present continuous. If we're talking about exceptional behavior, we're going to be talking about I'm sorry, if you're talking about a habit, we're going to be talking about the simple present or the simple past. If we're talking about exceptional behavior, we're going to be talking about the present continuous or the past continuous. Okay. So that's good. And then, so I think that is, I don't need to say much more than that for that. I would say the first thing is to really be square with, identifying things. And that goes on to, the assignment that you're going to have this week is going to be very similar. You're going to have to, use a modal verb as a root modal or an epistemic modal. That's pretty, all the modals basically as root modals are epistemically. And also I'm going to, give you the um, various what do we call them? Semi-modal constructions like to be able to. You're gonna practice using those. I'm just gonna ask you to use them in sort of individual sentences, right? So in ways that sort of make it then illustrate that you understand what they mean. And I'm also going to ask you to translate those into French to make sure that you're clear with the meaning of what you're writing. Um, so you're going to be doing that, and I'm going to ask you to underline the verb phrase. So once again, a verb phrase we're going to have, is going to be, because you're going to be using modals, it's going to be the modal followed by, there might be, let's say, there could be a have plus verb en, there could be be plus verb ing, or there could be just the verb. They may walk would be just may walk. I'm sort of pretending I'm writing it here. Would be the underlined verb phrase, and it's important to only underline those words, and that's a really good. It's important because that sort of means that you're sort of focused on the relevant material, and it'll make a big difference to you being able to do that successfully. So I wish you luck with your assignment. Once again, hand it in, respecting the form of the way of naming the file, using the Moodle application. And it should be fairly straightforward, and I hope that you will be able to build on the commentary I gave you, that you can kind of use that, kind of really spend the time to study the assignment I just handed back. Really, if you can study from that, and also look at the exercises we've just did, I think it'll help. I think that will go a long way to allowing you to kind of do a better job on your second one. So thank you and take care.